Hi again, Andy here with some more videos on how to use SolidWorks to design real stuff. Recall the last videos we did, we made a couple of different sized Lego blocks. Well, Lego blocks are only fun to play with if you actually put them together into stuff, so let's try doing that. In order to do this in SolidWorks, we don't work in the part environment. We actually go and work in something called the assembly environment. If you go back to the opening window for SolidWorks, recall that if you click a new part or a new file that we came up with before, the three different environments that I briefly showed you or explained, well, we're going to now move on to this assembly environment. So if you click assembly and OK, a new window opens up. In my case, it opened up with files that it thinks I want to use. And in this case, it comes up with this window and a yellow box, create layout. What's that? Well, it doesn't even really matter. It's just the starting point, the basis for the assembly. If you click the start layout and it gives you a plane, and just accept that, it'll be fine. Because the real important thing we want to do with an assembly is we want to put components together. And so you'll see, instead of having some of the familiar tools you've tried already with the top toolbar in part, there's these different ones. Now we have this tab assembly, a tab layout, a familiar tab sketch, which has a lot of familiar stuff to it, familiar tab evaluate, which has that measure tool we used before, and a bunch of other things. But this assembly is really different. Well, the first thing we want to do is insert some components. So if you click Insert Components, it opens up a window, and you can see these are some of the parts that we made already. 8block.solidPart, 8block.solidPart. These are the two different 8 blocks that I made, and a 4 block. Well, we might as well start with the first one, the 4 block. So if I click that, and I click Open, the part shows up. Now I can roll my mouse out to make it smaller, and without touching anything on the mouse and moving it around, it's looking for me to put it someplace. But it's kind of floating in space, so it doesn't matter. Now with the layout, we could have actually made a geometry in which it would fit, but floating in space is fine for something like this right now. You'll notice that before you place it, you can take the orientation, which this part was created in it with its own XYZ coordinate system, but that might be different than the assembly's coordinate system. So we could actually go down on the bottom here, and we could click to rotate that. And if you rotate it enough times, I'm just clicking the X button there, it'll come back to the original geometry. Sometimes that's helpful. In this case, with just Lego blocks, it's not really going to matter that much. So I'm just going to click, and that part is now placed. Now the first part that you place becomes the reference for everything else. So when you're modeling something, keep in mind that the easiest way to make something is to kind of have a vision for where you're going with it and start with the most logical first part. So we've got a first part in space. If you click on the little left arrow beside that part, you'll see that it's got all of the same tools that you had seen before in the part modeling environment. It's got its name. And there it is. If you right click on this part, as I'm doing here, then there's a bunch of tools that come up which actually link you back to the part the part environment you've worked in before. You can open the part, that is, open the actual file and edit the file back in the part environment if you want. You can open the part still in this environment. And you can edit the part actually in the context of other parts. Each of those is very powerful and very useful depending on what you're doing for modeling. and you practice with those things as you go along. But for now, we need to insert some more components. So I'm going to go back up to insert components, and I think I want to put in an 8 block. And there the 8 block shows up. Now, I didn't really want to put it that way. I actually wanted to put it in line with the part, and I could rotate about the y-axis like so, and I could place it here. Now, it just is kind of random the way it got placed. I didn't want it to be there. That's kind of stupid. And so how do I move it over here? Because it's in this infinite ocean of space that is not well constrained. Well, there's these things called mates. These are the relationships between parts that you need to come to terms with. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to specify how these parts are to be mated. So I'm going to click Mate with the left button, and now a new window opens up on the left which has some of these funny features. Now I need to pick on parts things that are going to fit together and how they're going to fit together. Well, one of the things in the case of these parts I'd like to do is I would like to have that face on the side of this part. And if I click it with the left mouse button, it shows up in the selections dialog. And I want that face. And when I click those two faces, SolidWorks knows that there's different ways that they could fit together. They can be coincident, which means that they are together. They could simply be parallel, which means the planes will be parallel. They could be perpendicular, and if you do that, that'll be different. They could be parallel like that, or they could be coincident. I'm going to pick coincident. And if I click the green arrow, then that mate is selected. Now they're still not together. That it wasn't what I wanted. And if I try to take this part, I can move it around. It looks like I'm moving it around in space. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm just moving it along that plane. So it can be deceptive in how you're viewing. If you click the button down here for 3 views, you can create more views. I don't usually work in that. I usually just use the single view and try to understand what I'm doing. So the way that I want to put these together now is I definitely fit those two faces together parallel. I can just carry on with that. So if I select this side face and this side face, now it's slid those together, and I want those to be coincident again, and they're together. And now if I try to move this part, the only thing I can do is move it up and down, like on rails beside this part. So if it's still movable, it's still flexible, it's not fixed in place. So I could pick another surface, let's say this one, and this one, and those are coincident. And if I do that, the parts are together. And now if I try to move this one, it's fully defined, it can't be moved. And that's what I wanted. So now those guys fit together. So that's the mates for those. Now if I'm going to insert another component, let's pick the other 8 block one. There it is. I could try and rotate it about the Y if I want to put it across those blocks. I don't have to though, because I can use the mates for all of that. I can go back to this plane and click mate, and this plane, and I want to make them coincident. Now, one of the things it did was it made them coincident, but they're kind of on the wrong side. There's this mate alignment button down here, and if I change that, then it's put them on the proper side. In kind of a wonky angle, but we'll leave that for the moment. And I click the arrow select. I can click for a new mate, this plane and this plane, like so. Now it's decided, it doesn't know any better than to insert parts inside one another, so it did that. And so now I can still slide this up and down. So that means I need one more mate. I'm going to pick this surface and this surface. And that's brought them together. There. Now, I can keep going like this, and you will when you make a complicated device. But there's lots of different ways to put things together. I can take another 4 block, let's say. And in the case of this one, I'll just plop it there. And you know about the mates already. We've just been doing that. I'm going to pick that and make them coincident. Now I could pick some other mates too. I could say, let's make, let's pick, I want to pick that edge, and that circle. And it's given me some different options here. Coincident isn't one of them. And so whatever I pick, it will tell me what is doable for those mates. In this case, it isn't the one I want. It's going to try and make them concentric. That wasn't right. So I'm going to delete that first bit. And I'm going to pick that whole surface. And I'm going to say I want to make that surface tangent. And it's made it tangent in a wonky sort of way. But that didn't give me what I wanted. I'm going to actually pick these ones, and I'm going to make them coincident. But now it still has that vertical motion there. Notice that it's made it so that this nub is actually forced to be lined up with that surface, which is cool. And so I need to have one more mate. And any number of them could be picked. Certainly with this geometry, the easiest one is that face to this face. I could pick this face and this face and see what it gives me. It's got that tangent again. That didn't put it where I wanted it. Oh, didn't like that one. So I'm going to eliminate that and go back, and I guess I'll do the easy one. I'll just take that plane, plonk them together, and we're done. So there we have a Lego wall made of parts. And you can keep adding the same parts over and over again. We can make it as big as we want in as many multiples as we want. And that's assembly. Understanding the mating is absolutely key to it. Realizing that the parts have to fit together, and more often than not, the problems that I get into with using assemblies are because I built a part that doesn't have the right keyed features to enable it to fit together another part, which is kind of important when you're designing things anyway. So that's it for now. Thanks for paying attention. Good luck, and there'll be lots more of this.